The assembly will now come to order. The chief clerk will call the roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Assemblywoman Backus. Assemblywoman Bilbright Axelrod. Assemblywoman Brown May. Assemblyman Carter. Assemblywoman Cohen. Assemblywoman Considine. Assemblyman DeLong. Assemblywoman Dickman. Assemblyman De Silva. Assemblywoman Duran. Assemblywoman Gallant. Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Assemblywoman Gurlow. Assemblyman Gray. Assemblyman Gurr. Assemblyman Hafen. Assemblywoman Hanson. Assemblywoman Hardy. Assemblyman Hibbets. Assemblywoman Howdigi. Assemblywoman Kasama. Assemblyman Koenig. Assemblywoman Lura Hatch. Assemblywoman Marzola. Assemblyman MacArthur. Assemblywoman Brittany Miller. Assemblyman C.H. Miller. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno. Assemblywoman Muska. Assemblywoman Newby. Assemblyman Wynn. Assemblyman O'Neill. Assemblyman Orlicker. Assemblywoman Peters. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Assemblywoman Taylor. Assemblywoman Thomas. Assemblywoman Torres. Assemblyman Watts. Assemblyman Urick. Speaker Yeager.
Here. Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May the record reflect we have 42 members present.
The record shall so reflect. We have 42 members present. That means we do have a quorum. Would members of the assembly and guests please rise? We have the prayer this morning by Deacon Tom Roberts, Catholic Charities of Southern Nevada in Las Vegas.
My wife and I have spent the majority of our adult life here. We've raised our children here. This is our home. So it is a privilege to be with you. Let us pray. Kind and loving God, we thank you for having created us, for loving us, and for bringing us here together as a part of the human family. As our creator and our shepherd, we give thanks for the gifts of diversity and of inclusion, for that binds us together in the spirit of common community and gratitude for our many blessings. We gather together this morning with the richness of many beliefs and faith traditions. May these spiritual gifts wash over us with respect for one another. We humbly ask you, Lord, your blessing upon this state legislature, on our governor, and on everyone working in our state government, all that are entrusted with the privilege of service of all of God's children here in the great state of Nevada. We implore you to seal with us your wisdom, your compassion, your empathy, especially for some of the most vulnerable among us, the poor and the hungry, and the homeless and the voiceless, all who depend on government and private sector services to survive and thrive. May we, together as a community, be effective stewards in caring for our sisters and brothers in greatest need, always with dignity and compassion. Place in our hearts, Lord, the spirit to make a positive difference in our families, in our communities, in our state, and in our nation. Help us to achieve these goals with determination, with perseverance, goodness, and a sense of humor. Give us balance and humility in times of distraction and uncertainty. And Lord, give us your peace. Amen.
Amen. Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Order of Business 2, reading and approval of the journal.
Carson City, Wednesday, April 19th.
Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to end with reading of the journal and allow the Speaker and Chief Clerk to make any necessary corrections and additions.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Members, we're going to go to Order of Business 15 because we have a number of guests with us on the floor, and although I'm often wrong, my prediction is we have about an hour to an hour and a half of business on the floor, so we'll allow folks to introduce our guests, and then we'll give our guests a moment to leave the floor if they would like, or if you want to stay with us for our business, that would be welcome too. So under Order of Business 15, remarks from the floor, we'll start with Assemblywoman Brown-May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have about 40 amazing guests with us here today who represent the nonprofit sector throughout the state of Nevada. So if you are here as part of the CEO Exchange, United Way of Southern Nevada, or a nonprofit, please rise. So there are 13 collaborative organizations that function as the nonprofit CEO Exchange in Southern Nevada that are doing the hard work every day. And we are honored to have them here among us today in the People's House. Together as a group, there are about 60 of these amazing folks that are here with us in this body. And so we want to present them with this proclamation. So here with me, I have Jessica Rauch, who is the lead organizer with the Nonprofit CEO Exchange, and Bob Brown, who is the president and CEO of Opportunity Village. But you'll see there are CEOs for the nonprofit sector that are here among us. And they've journeyed here to make sure that we as a body helped them to be collaborative in how do we support our nonprofit sector. So on behalf of all of the members in this distinguished body, I want to recognize the important hard work that is being done by each of our nonprofit organizations throughout our entire state of Nevada. And rather than read this proclamation, which I know you'll all appreciate, we just want to call out that the 2022 Nevada Corporate Giving Report noted that corporate philanthropy in Nevada reached $1.7 billion. As a legislative body, each time we partner with nonprofits and philanthropists who support them, we become the third leg of the stool that helps the most vulnerable among us. So we are collaborative in that partnership. Together, the nonprofits are indeed the glue that holds our safety nets together to lift those who are in need of assistance. And so please join me in welcoming all of our nonprofit leaders here today.
Assemblywoman Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have SEIU in the house today. So I need you to raise. Please rise. All SEIU. You know that I am so proud that I'm an SEIU member, even though I'm in the assembly right here, and I am proud to say that SEIU Local 1107 is the largest union of healthcare and public service workers in Nevada, representing over 19,000 employees. They are part of the Service Employees International Union, an organization of 2 million members united by their belief in the dignity and worth of workers and the services they provide. SEIU Local 1107 is committed to advocating for quality, health care, and public services, good union jobs, and racial and economic justice for all Nevadans. Please help me make them feel welcome today. And Mr. Speaker, I want to recognize the Executive Director of SEIU 1107, Ms. Grace Vicara Machtel. Please make her feel welcome. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today with me I have Wendy Firestone from Notables Music Therapy Services and several of their music therapy program folks in the balcony here. Music therapy is one of the creative arts therapies that involves the clinical use of music within a therapeutic relationship to accomplish individualized goals suited to a person's needs. Music therapy can include creating music with or without instruments to help a person struggling with anxiety or depression, using music as a tool to encourage movement, to build fine and gross motor skills, or singing to help bring back speech after a traumatic brain injury. This nonprofit organization works with people of all ages, including veterans, children with disabilities, people with Parkinson's disease, brain injuries, and motor function challenges, and many more vulnerable populations. Notable Music Therapy Services will be doing some music therapy demonstrations in the foyer, and I hope you all stop by to see them in action. Thank you for being here.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a very special guest that I've known my whole life, my big sister, who's my little, stand up. Just look how tiny she is, my big little sister, and Dr. Geis as well. But Bridget, my sis, is a lifelong educator. And she's retired, but she doesn't know how to retire because she's not that person who would ever retire. So she's here working with the Silver State Foundation, working on the teacher pipeline to get teachers to Nevada and stay here and make it easier. So I'm so happy to have her here. But just so you know a little bit about Bridget, she was the first one at school in the morning, the last one to leave, locking up with the janitor. They had to actually, I think, change the laws about who could, how many teachers you could bring when you went to a new school because everybody wanted to go with her. She's just like that committed, and I'm just so lucky to have you here. I love you. Make them both feel welcome. Thank you.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce the body to my special guest, Bill Supple, and you'll never guess who wrote this introduction for Mr. Supple. Bill is a wastewater professional with over 30 years of experience and currently works for the Clark County Water Reclamation District. He has been in Nevada for the past 10 years after moving from Long Island. He's joining us today from Henderson for SEIU Lobby Day as a union steward, and Bill's a constituent of mine, and even better, he's father to the best attaché in the building. That would be my attaché. And he's also an awesome Uber Eats driver wannabe who brought barbecue from, how did we say it? Tonopah, otherwise known as Tonopah, on his drive up yesterday, so please make him feel welcome.
If you promise to bring barbecue, you are always welcome in the People's House. Assemblyman Wynn.
Sorry, apologies. Sorry, technology difficulty. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague, Assemblywoman from District 17, already introduced Trailblazer that's sitting with her today. That was Grace Vergara-McTall, the first API woman to lead SEIU 1107. So we're very honored in my district as my constituent to have another trailblazer as my guest today is the president of SEIU 1107, Michelle Maesi. You know, this lady works so hard for the community and for everybody that's involved, and I'm so blessed to represent her because she's the first person to answer text at 5 a.m., and you know I'm not a morning person. And the last person to answer the text at 1 a.m. So she is there for the community. She's there every day across our entire district and state to make sure that the voices are always at the table. Incredible parent, has been with the Clark County Social Services for over 15 years. And just an overall amazing leader. Again, first Black woman to hold a leadership role at SEIU 1107, as well as SEIU across the country. And we're just so proud that I have so many amazing constituents that come to visit the People's House during my first term. And I want to make sure that we highlight Michelle today for her work and her commitment to make sure that all voices are heard. So please, if anyone can make her feel welcome.
Assemblywoman Thomas, did you have another order of business 15?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have my constituent that I would like to personally introduce. And yes, she belongs to SEIU, but she's my constituent, and she's here. And I would like to introduce Robin Franklin. I'm so proud of the fact that she came here, and I'm glad you're making her feel welcome. And then I have someone else, my backbone, my BFF. I want you to know and see her, because whatever I do, know that she got my back. So whatever I do, she got my back, all right? Her name is Patricia Armstrong. Thank you so much.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I too have my constituent here, Debbie Springer, so please stand up. I think a lot of you guys know Debbie, right? Executive Vice President of SEIU Public Sector. So thank you, and been my constituent this whole time that I've been here, so thank you. Walking, knocking doors and doing all that stuff, so thank you. Make her feel welcome.
Okay, we will have another order of business 15 at the end, but wanted to give folks, anyone else, a chance. If you had an order of business 15 before we take a brief recess, please hit your speak button and I will recognize you. Okay, not seeing any. Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I move that we stand in a 1-minute recess to allow our guests, those who would like to exit the floor while we get back to business, to do so. Thank you.
We'll be in a 1-minute recess. The Assembly will come back to order. We'll go next to Order Business 4, reports of standing committees.
Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Commerce and Labor, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 218, 298, 410, has had the similar consideration and begs leave to put the same back. The recommendation amended do pass as amended. Elaine Marzola, Chair. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Education, to which will refer to Assembly Bill 73, 228, has had the similar consideration and begs leave to put the same back. The recommendation amended do pass as amended. Shannon Bilbra, Axelrod, Chair. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Government Affairs, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 224, 333, has had the similar consideration and begs leave to report the same back. The recommendation amended do pass amended. And your Committee on Government Affairs, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 305, 310, 391, has had the similar consideration and begs leave to report the same back. The recommendation amended do pass amended. Selena Torres, Chair. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Natural Resources, to which will refer to Assembly Bills 91, 249, 313, has had the similar consideration and begs leave to report the same back. The recommendation amended do pass amended. Leslie E. Cohen, Chair. Mr. Speaker, your Committee on Revenue, to which was referred to Assembly Bill 53, has had the similar consideration and begs leave to report the same back. The recommendation and do pass amended. Shea Backus, Chair.
Order Business 6, communications.
Congress of the United States, House of Representatives, Washington, D.C., 20515-3605, April 19, 2023. The Honorable Steve Yeager, Speaker, Nevada State Assembly, 401 South Carson Street, Carson City, Nevada, 89701. The Honorable Nicole J. Canizaro, Majority Leader, Nevada State Senate, 401 South Carson Street, Carson City, Nevada, 89701. Dear Speaker Yeager and Leader Canizaro, I am requesting the opportunity to speak before the distinguished members of the Nevada State Legislature on Wednesday, May 31st, 2023. I look forward to addressing a joint session about the pressing issues before the United States Congress in the upcoming months and their impact on the great state of Nevada. Please contact Kiana Shalamon at 702-701-6942 if you have any questions. Thank you in advance for your kind consideration. Sincerely, Susie Lee, Member of Congress.
Order of Business 7, messages from the Senate.
Senate Chamber, Carson City, April 19, 2023. To the Honorable the Assembly, I have the honor to inform your Honorable Body that the Senate on this day passed Senate Bills 131, 134, 215, 252, 309, 340, 378, 397, 401, 442, and I have the honor to inform your Honorable Body that the Senate on this day passed as amended Senate Bills 11, 27, 50, 85, 90, 113, 169, 172, 203, 208, 239, 249, 264, 270, 283, 316, 317, 368, 381, 382. Sherry Rodriguez, Assistant Secretary of the Senate.
Order of Business 8, motions, resolutions, and notices.
Notice of exemption, April 19, 2023. The Fiscal Analysis Division, pursuant to Joint Standing Law 14.6, has determined the eligibility for exemption of Senate Bills numbers 54, 139, 222, and 389. Wayne Thorley, Fiscal Analysis Division. Notice of exemption, April 19, 2023. The Fiscal Analysis Division, pursuant to Joint Standing Law 14.6, has determined the eligibility for exemption of Senate Bill 107, Wayne Burley, Fiscal Analysis Division. Notice of exemption, April 20, 2023. The Fiscal Analysis Division, pursuant to Joint Standing Law 14.6, has determined the eligibility for exemption of Assembly Bills 125 and 222. Sarah Kaufman, Fiscal Analysis Division.
Assemblywoman Howdegee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the persons as set forth on the Nevada Legislature's press accreditation list of April 20th, 2023 be accepted as accredited press representatives, that they be assigned space at the press table in the Assembly chamber, and that they be allowed the use of appropriate broadcasting facilities, and that the list be included in this day's journal.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblywoman Howdegee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 50 be taken from the Chief Clerk's desk and placed on general file for the purposes of amendment.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Order of Business 9, introduction, first reading, and reference of bills.
Assembly Bill 465, introduced by Assemblyman Yeager, an act relating to state militia, revising the age requirements for enlisted personnel and commissioned officers, revising provisions governing the Adjutant General of the Office of the Military, and providing other matters properly in thereto. Senate Bill 11, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Growth and Senate Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. An act relating to unmanned aerial vehicles requiring the Department of Public Safety to adopt certain regulations relating to unmanned aerial vehicles and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 27, introduced by the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services. An act relating to excavations, revising provisions governing excavations conducted in areas that are known or reasonably should be known to contain a subsurface installation and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 50, introduced by the Senate Committee on Revenue and Economic Development. An act relating to taxation, revising provisions governing the sales tax holiday occurring over the day on which Nevada Day is observed and the immediately following weekend for certain members of the National Guard and certain relatives of such members and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 85, introduced by Senator Daley. An act relating to highways, revising provisions governing the amount of money that the Director of the Department of Transportation must retain under certain highway contracts, revising provisions governing the disbursement of money by a contractor to a subcontractor or supplier, and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 90, introduced by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. An act relating to state emblems, designating the wild Mustang as the official state horse of the state of Nevada and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 113, introduced by Senators Goycochea et al. By request. An act relating to water, requiring the state engineer to affirm or modify the perennial yield of a basin in a designated critical management area, revising provisions relating to groundwater management plans and providing the measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 131, introduced by Senators Canizaro et al., Assemblyman Anderson et al., an act relating to reproductive health care, prohibiting health care licensing boards from disqualifying from licensure or disciplining a person for providing or assisting in the provision of certain reproductive health care services, prohibiting the governor from surrendering or issuing an arrest warrant for a person who is charged in another state with a criminal violation related to certain reproductive health care services, prohibiting state agencies from assisting in certain investigations and proceedings initiated in other states related to certain reproductive health care services, requiring certain health care licensing boards to examine the feasibility of reciprocal licensure for health care providers who provide reproductive health care services in other states and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 134, introduced by Senators Sievers-Gansert et al., Assemblyman Kasama et al., an act relating to health care, prohibiting an insured from entering into a contract with a provider of vision care that contains certain provisions and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 169, introduced by the Senate Committee on Government Affairs, and act relating to land use planning, requiring certain local governments to include a heat mitigation element in master plans and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 172, introduced by Senators Harris et al., an act relating to healthcare, authorizing a minor to give express consent to certain healthcare providers for certain services for the prevention of sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy, and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 203, introduced by Senator Danyade, an act relating to pharmacy, prohibiting a wholesaler or manufacturer of drugs, medicines, chemicals, or medical devices or plants from offering or giving a gift to a practitioner, requiring the State Board of Pharmacy to provide a link on its internet website to certain information concerning gifts provided by a manufacturer to a practitioner, providing penalty and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 208, introduced by Senators Flores et al., an act relating to local governments, requiring the governing body of a county or city to enact ordinances relating to battery charge fences and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 215, introduced by the Senate Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections, an act relating to elections, requiring the governing body of a county or city to return money appropriated or granted for the purchase of a mechanical voting system or mechanical voting recording device under certain circumstances, and providing other measures relating thereto. Senate Bill 239, introduced by Senators Flores et al., Assemblyman Torres et al., an act relating to health care, revising provisions concerning medical certificates of death relating to a person who self-administers a medication that is designed to end his or her life, authorizing a physician or advanced practice registered nurse to prescribe a medication that is designed to end the life of a patient under certain circumstances, prohibiting persons other than a patient from administering a medication that is designed to end the life of the patient, imposing requirements on certain providers of healthcare and healthcare facilities relating to the records of a patient who requests a medication that is designed to end his or her life, providing immunity to certain providers of healthcare and healthcare facilities that take certain actions relating to prescribing or dispensing a medication that is designed to end the life of a patient, authorizing the owner or operator of a healthcare facility to prohibit certain persons from providing certain services relating to a medication that is designed to end the life of the patient, prohibiting a person from conditioning provisions of a will contract agreement or policy of life insurance on the request for or acquisition or administration of a medication that is designed to end the life of the person, prohibiting a person from denying benefits under a policy of life insurance to or imposing additional charges against a policyholder or beneficiary because the insured requested or revoked a request for a medication that that is designed to end the life of a person and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 249, introduced by Senators Lang et al., Assemblyman Nguyen, an act relating to cosmetology, revising provisions governing the scope of practice of certain persons licensed and regulated by the State Board of Cosmetology, establishing procedures to contest certain citations issued by the board, repealing or removing provisions which provide for the licensure and regulation by the board of demonstrators of cosmetics and establishments for hair braiding, revising the powers and duties of the board and the executive director of the board, requiring the board to adopt certain regulations, revising certain requirements for a person to obtain certain licenses and certificates of registration issued by the board, revising certain licensing fees, revising provisions concerning the issuance and renewal of certain licenses and certificates of registration issued by the board, revising provisions relating to the cosmetological establishments and schools of cosmetology, revising certain requirements relating to the supervision of certain apprentices, authorizing the board to issue certain citations and providing the matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 252, introduced by Senator Flores, and relating to civil actions, making reasonable fees for the provision of a focus group recoverable as costs incurred in connection with certain civil actions and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 264, introduced by Senators Doñate and Pazina, and relating to collective bargaining, revising the provisions relating to the authority of a civilian employee of a metropolitan police department to be a member of an employee organization and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 270, introduced by Senator Scheibel, and relating to massage therapy, enacting the Interstate Massage Compact, increasing the number of members of the Board of Massage Therapy required to constitute a quorum for the purposes of transacting the business of the board, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 283, introduced by Senators Pezina et al., and relating to healthcare, requiring certain persons and entities to furnish healthcare records electronically under certain circumstances, prohibiting such persons and entities from charging a fee that exceeds a certain amount to furnish healthcare records electronically if the healthcare records are maintained electronically, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 309, introduced by Senators Canizaro et al., and relating to crimes establishing the crime of fertility fraud, creating the cause of action for a person who has suffered injury as a result of fertility fraud, providing that certain acts that constitute fertility fraud are subject to various statutory provisions relating to sex offenders, prohibiting a healthcare facility from taking certain actions relating to assisted reproduction, authorizing the imposition of civil penalties for certain violations committed by a healthcare facility, providing penalties, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 316, introduced by Senator Scheibel et al., and relating to criminal law, revising provisions relating to certain annual reports concerning criminal cases and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 317, introduced by Senator Scheibel et al., and relating to public welfare, authorizing a provider of homeless services to authorize the use of the provider's address as a temporary mailing address by a person experiencing homelessness for certain purposes, requiring the Division of Welfare and Supportive Services of the Department of Health and Human Services to publish a list of such providers and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 340, introduced by Senators John Loop et al., and relating to education, requiring the Board of Trustees of a school district and the state Public Charter School Authority to submit to the Superintendent of Public Instruction plans for the provision of summer school to certain pupils, requiring the submission to certain entities of certain reports relating to such plans for the provision of summer school and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 368, introduced by Senators Harris et al., and relating to real property, prescribing a procedure for removing certain discriminatory restrictions or prohibitions from a written instrument relating to real property, requiring the Real Estate Division of the Department of Business and Industry to prescribe a restrictive covenant modification form, eliminating certain provisions relating to a declaration of the removal of a discriminatory restriction or prohibition, requiring each county recorder in the state to provide certain notice to each owner who recorded a declaration of removal of a discriminatory restriction or prohibition with the office of the county recorder, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 378, introduced by Senators Canizaro and Stone, and relating to common interest communities, revising the type of documents that are required to be made available on the internet website or within the electronic portal that is required to be established and maintained by certain unit owners associations, setting forth certain requirements for an internet website or electronic portal that provides the ability for unit owners to make certain payments electronically, revising requirements concerning the provision of certain notices by an association, authorizing an association to purchase a unit in a common interest community at a foreclosure sale, and providing other matters properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 381, introduced by Senators Harris et al., and relating to property, prohibiting a landlord with certain exceptions from requiring a tenant to pay any any fee or other charge for the performance of certain repairs, maintenance tasks, or other work for which the landlord has a duty performed to maintain the habitability of a dwelling unit and providing other measures properly thereto. Senate Bill 382, introduced by the Senate Committee on Judiciary, enacting juvenile is eliminating the requirement that a district court appoint counsel for a child who is the adverse party in a proceeding for certain orders for protection, providing that an admission, representation, or statements made during the proceeding relating to the issuance or dissolution of certain orders for protection is not admissible in any criminal proceeding and providing other measures properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 397, introduced by Senator Canizaro, enacting public safety, exempting certain railroad companies from provisions governing operators of subsurface installations and providing other measures properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 401, introduced by Senators Flores and Stone, enacting civil actions revising provisions relating to the circumstances under which punitive damages may be awarded in certain civil actions and providing other measures properly laid thereto. Senate Bill 442, introduced by Senator Dandere Lope, enacting education, enacting the Interstate Teacher Mobility Compact, requiring the Commission on Professional Standards in Education to adopt regulations to carry out the provisions of the compact, exempting an applicant for a license as a teacher pursuant to the compact from certain examination and training requirements and providing other measures properly laid thereto.
Assemblywoman Jauregui.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Senate bills read and introduced on the bill's introduction list dated April 20th, 2023 be referred to the committees as indicated on the list, and all members have a copy of this list on their desk.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll go next to Order of Business 11, second reading and amendment.
Assembly Bill 14, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, enacting the business revising provisions governing the state business portal, requiring the Secretary of State to provide for the integration with the state business portal of the applications of a state or local agency or health district for a license, certificate, registration, permit, or similar type of authorization to conduct a business in the state, requiring with certain exceptions each state agency, local agency, and health district to comply with certain requirements related to the state business portal and providing other measures properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 257, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 257 to Assembly Bill 14.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 257 to Assembly Bill 14. Remarks?
Amendment 257 deletes the bill in its entirety and then establishes the Business Licensing Working Group within the Office of the Secretary of State.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 257 to Assembly Bill 14 signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 49, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, enacting criminal procedure prescribing separate forms for certain post-conviction petitions for a writ of habeas corpus, revising various provisions relating to post-conviction petitions for a writ of habeas corpus, eliminating the requirement that the respondent to a post-conviction petition for a writ of habeas corpus file a return with the court, revising provisions relating to a petition for a hearing to establish the factual innocence of a person, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 27, end of Section 27, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 151, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 151 to Assembly Bill 49.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 151 to Assembly Bill 49. Remarks?
Amendment 151 provides a definition of prosecuting attorney, provides instructions to clarify when the form should be used, provides that a petition that challenges a conviction or sentence may be filed within 1 year under certain circumstances, and requires that one copy of the completed petition must be mailed to the prosecuting attorney.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 151 to Assembly Bill 49 signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills were reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 55, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, an act related to unclaimed property, revising provisions of the Uniform Unclaimed Property Act and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 17, end of Section 17, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 44, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 44 to Assembly Bill 55.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 44 to Assembly Bill 55. Remarks?
Amendment 44 revises provisions of the Uniform Unclaimed Property Act and authorizes the administrator of unclaimed property to adopt regulations.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 44 to Assembly Bill 55 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills were reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 70, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to wildlife, revising provisions relating to the authorized uses of certain fees for processing each application for a game tag and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 199, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 199 to Assembly Bill 70.
Assemblywoman Cohen has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 199 to Assembly Bill 70. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The amendment revises provisions relating to the use of the $3 game tag application fee charged by the Department of Wildlife, and the amendment requires the department to use these proceeds as directed by the applicant for certain programs or activities.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 199 to Assembly Bill 70 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills are reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 77, introduced by Assemblyman Yeager, an act relating to economic development, creating the Office of Entrepreneurship within the Office of Economic Development, setting forth the powers and duties of the Office of Entrepreneurship, providing that the records, files, communications of the Office of Economic Development are confidential, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 15, end of Section 15, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 482, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Revenue.
Assemblywoman Backus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would move for the adoption of Amendment number 482 to Assembly Bill 77.
Assemblywoman Backus has moved to adopt Amendment number 482 to Assembly Bill 77. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment number 482 to Assembly Bill 77 requires the Office of Entrepreneurship to refer businesses to other appropriate state or local agencies assisting small businesses, and expands the information which must be included by the office in the report submitted to the Legislative Commission.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 482 to Assembly Bill 77 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills were reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 125, introduced by Assemblywoman Backus, an act related to public safety, requiring the tribal liaison for the Department of Public Safety to maintain ongoing communication relating to missing or murdered Indigenous persons between the department and certain entities, requiring a law enforcement agency to accept a report relating to certain persons missing from an Indian reservation or Indian colony located in whole or in part in the state, requiring the Peace Officers Standards and Training Commission to adopt certain regulations for the training of peace officers related to missing Indigenous persons, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 5, end of Section 5, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 258, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Amendment 258 be adopted to Assembly Bill 125.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 258 to Assembly Bill 125. Remarks?
Amendment 258 revises the bill to be permissive due to jurisdictional concerns and adds co-sponsors.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 258 to Assembly Bill 125 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 126, introduced by Assemblyman Senator Wynn, an act related to business entities, authorizing certain business entities to correct an erroneously filed record with the Office of the Secretary of State, clarifying provisions concerning certain records required to be kept by certain business entities, clarifying provisions relating to certain actions available to the Board of Directors of a corporation, establishing the circumstances under which a corporation may decrease the number of certain issued and outstanding shares without a vote of the stockholders, revising provisions related to stock certificates, revising provisions governing restrictions on transfers of stock, authorizing a Board of Directors to require confidentiality agreement with certain persons, revising the definition of the term acquisition for certain purposes, establishing the circumstances under which a corporation may change the name of a corporation without a vote of the stockholders, revising provisions governing the restatement of articles of incorporation, clarifying provisions relating to the sale of certain assets, revising various definitions relating to dissenters' rights, making various other changes relating to business entities, and providing other measures relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 32, end of Section 32, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 323, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 323 to Assembly Bill 126.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of amendment number 323 to Assembly Bill 126. Remarks?
Amendment 323 deletes Section 16 of the bill and provides conforming changes concerning the correction of a record filed with the Office of the Secretary of State.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 323 to Assembly Bill 126 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 127, introduced by Assemblywoman Hadegay, an act relating to insurance prohibiting an insurer from treating Medicare supplemental policies differently for certain purposes relating to the payment of commissions and providing other measures relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 182, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 182 to Assembly Bill 127.
Assemblywoman Marzola has moved for the adoption of amendment number 182 to Assembly Bill 127. Remarks?
Amendment 182 to Assembly Bill 127 does the following: prohibits an insurer, other person, or entity from verifying that commission paid or otherwise paying commission differentials for Medicare supplemental policies. It also requires a Medicare supplemental policy purchased during the open enrollment period to be treated in the same manner.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 182 to Assembly Bill 127 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 135, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, that act relating to homelessness, revising the process for persons who are homeless to apply for a certified or official copy of a birth certificate, requiring the Nevada Housing Crisis Response System to assist persons in crisis who are applying for a state identification card, revising the requirements for the issuance of a state identification card to certain homeless children and youth, requiring certain counties to develop a strategic plan to address homelessness, and providing other measures relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 8, end of Section 8, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 173, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 173 to Assembly Bill 135.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of amendment number 173 to Assembly Bill 135. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 173 to Assembly Bill 135 revises certain provisions to prove a homeless child or youth's birth date and removes a requirement that certain counties develop strategic plans addressing homelessness, among other provisions.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 173 to Assembly Bill 135 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 169, introduced by Assemblywoman Gorlo et al., an act relating to feminine hygiene products, requiring with certain exceptions each package or box containing a feminine hygiene product that is manufactured on or after January 1, 2025, for sale or distribution in the state to bear a label containing a plain and conspicuous list of all ingredients in the feminine hygiene product, providing penalty and providing other measures relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 5, end of Section 5, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 126 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 126 to Assembly Bill 169.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 126 to Assembly Bill 169. Remarks?
Thank you. Amendment 126 to Assembly Bill 169 adds certain requirements for labels on feminine hygiene products.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 126 to Assembly Bill 169 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 171, introduced by Assemblyman Joanne et al., an act relating to public works, revising the procedures governing the award of certain contracts for public work and providing other measures relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 5, end of Section 5, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 250, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, most responsive speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 250 to AB 171.
Assemblywoman Torres has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 250 to Assembly Bill 171. Remarks?
The amendment revises the criteria for a public body of its authorized representative to consider in selecting the responsive and responsible bidder offering the best value bid for a public work project.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 250 to Assembly Bill 171 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 173, introduced by Assemblyman Gray et al., Senators Daly et al., an act relating to public works, revising provisions relating to certain bids for public work for which a list disclosing first-tier subcontractors is required, and providing other measures relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 331, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, most hardworking speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 331 to AB 173.
Assemblywoman Torres has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 331 to Assembly Bill 173. Remarks?
The amendment revises provisions relating to certain bids for public work, for which a list disclosing first-tier subcontractors is required.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 331 to Assembly Bill 173 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 175, introduced by Assemblyman Urick and Bilbray Axelrod, an act relating to education, revising provisions governing the election and appointment of members of the Board of Trustees of certain school districts, and providing other measures relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 9, end of Section 9, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 497, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Education.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 497 to Assembly Bill 175.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 497 to Assembly Bill 175. Remarks?
Amendment 497 to Assembly Bill 175 does the following: maintains a 7 elected voting members and adds 4 appointed non-voting members to the Board of Trustees in a school district with more than 75,000 pupils. It also removes the inclusion of a school district with fewer than 75,000 pupils from the provisions of the bill and restores certain language concerning elected districts for trustees.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 497 to Assembly Bill 175 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 184, introduced by Assemblyman Watts et al., Senators Harris and Pazina, an act relating to air pollution, creating the account for clean trucks and buses, creating the Clean Trucks and Buses Incentive Program, establishing various requirements for the program, and providing other measures relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 24, end of Section 24, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 200, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 200 of to Assembly Bill 184.
Assemblywoman Cohen has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 200 to Assembly Bill 184. Remarks?
The amendment revises provisions creating the Clean Trucks and Buses Incentive Program and adds certain state agencies to the list of eligible entities, revises provisions relating to increases to the base incentive amount, requires the State Environmental Commission to adopt various application and eligibility requirement regulations, and makes a one-time $4 million allocation from the State General Fund.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 200 to Assembly Bill 184 signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 190, introduced by Assemblywoman Kasama, an act relating to elections requiring the Secretary of State to prescribe by regulation a voter registration form that must be distributed by a title company and certain apartment associations and property management companies under certain circumstances, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 384, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 384 to Assembly Bill 190.
Assemblywoman Gorlow has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 384 to Assembly Bill 190. Remarks?
Amendment 384 to Assembly Bill 190 does the following. It authorizes any title company, apartment association, or property management company to distribute voter registration forms to persons who complete a real estate transaction or sign a lease.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 384 to Assembly Bill 190 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 193, introduced by Assemblyman Gonzalez, Zettel, Senators Orenshall, and Wynn, an act relating to criminal procedure prohibiting a peace officer or other person authorized to conduct a custodial interrogation of a child from making certain statements during a custodial interrogation of a child and providing other matters properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 260, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 260 to Assembly Bill 193.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 260 to Assembly Bill 193. Remarks?
Amendment 260 provides that a peace officer, or other person authorized to conduct a custodial interrogation of a child is prohibited from knowingly making a materially false statement. It provides a rebuttable presumption and certain exceptions if there is an imminent threat to life or property, and revises the effective date.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 260 to Assembly Bill 193 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 197, introduced by Assemblyman Orlicker, an act relating to healthcare, authorizing the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy of the Department of Health and Human Services to impose an assessment on certain healthcare providers, creating the account to improve healthcare quality and access for patients of certain providers, prescribing the authorized uses of the revenue generated by the assessment, requiring the Division to adopt regulations establishing administrative penalties against a healthcare provider who does not pay an assessment in a timely manner, authorizing the Division to take certain measures to collect an unpaid assessment toward administrative penalty, and providing other measures properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 10, end of Section 10, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 175, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 175 to Assembly Bill 197.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 175 to Assembly Bill 197. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 175 to Assembly Bill 197 excludes hospitals, physicians, and physician services from the bill's provisions, among other changes.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 175 to Assembly Bill 197 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 222, introduced by Assemblyman Carter et al., Senator Wynn, an act relating to public employees' retirement system, revising the computation of credit for service for certain members of the public employees' retirement system who are employed by a school district, and providing the measures properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 252, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, most effective Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 252 to AB 222.
Assemblywoman Torres has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 252 to Assembly Bill 222. Remarks?
The amendment makes two changes: revises the method for calculating retirement service credit for school district employees, and changes the effective date to July 1st, 2023.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 252 to Assembly Bill 222 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 223, introduced by Assemblyman Carter et al., Senator Wynn, enacting collection agencies, requiring a collection agency to provide a payoff letter upon the request of a debtor, authorizing a debtor to bring a civil action against a collection agency that violates that requirement, and providing other measures appropriate thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 72 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 72 to Assembly Bill 223.
Assemblywoman Marzola has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 72 to Assembly Bill 223. Remarks?
Amendment 72 to Assembly Bill 223 does the following: make several changes related to a payoff letter, including requiring a collection agency to send a letter by certain means and contain certain information. It also makes changes related to a satisfaction letter, and it also revises the method by which a collection agency must notify a medical debtor before taking any action.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 72 to Assembly Bill 223 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Are further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 252, introduced by Assemblywomen Cohen and Brown May, enacting governmental administration, creating the account for improving access to state museums for persons with disabilities in the State General Fund, revising the membership of the Board of Museums and History, requiring the administrator of the Division of Museums and History of the Department of Tourism and Cultural Affairs to develop and maintain an internet website related to institutions of the division to ensure that the internet website is accessible to persons who are blind or visually impaired, authorizing the administrator to authorize or require a museum director of an institution of the division to establish certain procedures that enable the accessibility of the exhibits in the institution to persons who are blind or visually impaired, requiring the Legislative Committee on Senior Citizens, Veterans, and Adults with Special Needs to study during the 2023-2024 interim any issues that exist that limit the ability of persons with disabilities to access the institutions of the division, and providing other measures appropriate thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 7, end of Section 7, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 254 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Most Technical Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 254 to AB 252.
Assemblywoman Torres has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 254 to Assembly Bill 252. Remarks?
The amendment expands certain provisions to include any person with a disability and makes a technical change to clarify that the administrator of the Division of History administers the new account.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 254 to Assembly Bill 252 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 256, introduced by Assemblywoman Mosca, enacting education, requiring the Department of Education to adopt regulations prescribing a method for the Board of Trustees of a school district to determine whether the employment and supervision of an employee in a work-based learning program is appropriate, requiring certain volunteers participating in a work-based learning program to be exempted from submitting fingerprints for the purpose of a criminal background check, deeming certain employees of a business agency or organization that participates in a work-based learning program not to be volunteers at a school for the purposes of certain fingerprinting requirements, and providing other measures appropriately thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 6, end of Section 6, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 145, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Education.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 145 to Assembly Bill 256.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 145 to Assembly Bill 256. Remarks?
Amendment 145 requires students who participate in work-based learning to complete training related to harassment and healthy relationships in the workplace, and authorizes the Board of Trustees of a school district to exempt a work-based learning volunteer from the requirements to submit fingerprints for a background check.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 145 to Assembly Bill 256 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Are further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 257, introduced by Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong, enacting forensic medical examinations requiring the county in whose jurisdiction a domestic violence battery by strangulation is committed to pay the cost of a strangulation forensic medical examination of the victim, authorizing the county to be reimbursed for such costs and providing other measures appropriately thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 394, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 394 to Assembly Bill 257.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 394 to Assembly Bill 257. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 394 authorizes a county to seek reimbursement of costs incurred from a strangulation examination from the state, subject to an appropriation made by the legislature, and provides that the collection of evidence is permitted for the potential use during a criminal investigation and prosecution.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 394 to Assembly Bill 257 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Are further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 259, introduced by Assemblywoman Brown May. An act relating to disabilities, requiring a provider of jobs and day training services to develop a plan to transition persons earning less than the state minimum wage to earning at least the state minimum wage or pursuing other services and assisting such persons to participate in certain activities, requiring a provider of jobs and day training services to submit a report relating to such a plan to the Aging and Disability Services Division of the Department of Health and Human Services, authorizing a recipient of jobs and day training services to have an advocate present at certain meetings, prohibiting any person from paying less than the state minimum wage to a person with an intellectual disability or developmental disability after a certain date, providing for the inclusion in the state plan for Medicaid certain services to assist such a person in pursuing competitive integrated employment, requiring the department to seek a waiver of certain federal requirements governing the compensation of a recipient of pre-vocational services under Medicaid and providing other measures appropriately thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 15, end of Section 15, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 177, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 177 to Assembly Bill 259.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 177 to Assembly Bill 259. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 177 to Assembly Bill 259 makes the bill's provisions applicable to all certified providers of jobs and day training services who are authorized to employ a person with a disability at less than the minimum wage, among other provisions.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 177 to Assembly Bill 259 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Further amendments to the bill.
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 261, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to governmental administration requiring the state plan for economic development to include a statement regarding the efficient use of water resources, requiring a plan submitted by a regional development authority to include water conservation strategies, requiring the Office of Energy to conduct a study relating to consumptive water use and economic development and providing other measures appropriately thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 479, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Revenue.
Assemblywoman Backus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment number 479 to Assembly Bill 261.
Assemblywoman Backus has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 479 to Assembly Bill 261. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment number 479 to Assembly Bill 261 specifies that the recruiting and marketing plan required to be submitted by each regional development authority shall include strategies to encourage the conservation of water resources of the state and requires the Governor's Office of Economic Development rather than the Governor's Office of Energy to conduct the study required in the bill.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 479 to Assembly Bill 261 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendment is adopted. Further amendments to the bill.
There are none.
Then the bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 274, introduced by Assemblyman Nguyen et al., Senators Dundee, Loop et al., an act relating to education requiring certain pupils enrolled in a public high school to enroll in a certain number of credits in social studies, which includes a certain number of credits in financial literacy, requiring instruction in financial literacy to include certain skills necessary to develop a personal financial plan and providing other matters properly named thereto, the people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 141 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Education.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 141 to Assembly Bill 274.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 141 to Assembly Bill 274. Remarks?
Amendment 141 makes changes to the membership of State Financial Literacy Advisory Council, provides that the Superintendent of Public Instruction of Nevada Department of Education must appoint the council's members and place the council within the department, and adds a co-sponsor.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 141 to Assembly Bill 274 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 275, introduced by Assemblyman Hardy and all Senators Hammond and Spearman, an act relating to criminal records prohibiting a court or agency of criminal justice from charging fees related to the sealing of criminal records under certain circumstances and providing other measures properly in thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 261 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 261 to Assembly Bill 275.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 261 to Assembly Bill 275. Remarks?
Amendment 261 requires, if applicable, a statement from the petitioner certifying that the petitioner was a victim of sex trafficking at the time the crimes were committed. It also adds co-sponsors to the bill.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 261 to Assembly Bill 275 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendments adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 279, introduced by Assemblyman Gisela et al., Senator Spearman et al., an act relating to the Nevada system of higher education prohibiting the assessment of tuition charges against a student within the system whose parent is a veteran who has been awarded the Purple Heart, requiring the waiver of the payment of registration fees and certain other fees assessed against such a student and providing the measures properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 372 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Education.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 372 to Assembly Bill 279.
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 372 to Assembly Bill 279. Remarks?
Amendment 372 provides a waiver granted to a child of a veteran who has been awarded the Purple Heart may be used for 10 years after the child attains 18 years of age, or if the child enrolls in Nevada system of higher education before attaining 18 years of age for 10 years after the date of enrollment.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 372 to Assembly Bill 279 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 293, introduced by Assemblyman Ortlicker, an act relating to Medicaid, requiring the Medicaid program to provide coverage of certain services provided by a medical legal partnership and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 178 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 178 to Assembly Bill 293.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 178 to Assembly Bill 293. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 178 to Assembly Bill 293 removes certain references to services that are or may potentially be provided pursuant to a Medicaid waiver as being in the state plan of Medicaid.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 178 to Assembly Bill 293 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 316, introduced by Assemblyman C.H. Miller, an act relating to motor vehicles revising the penalty for the unlawful possession of unregistered vehicles unfit for use and providing other measures properly in thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 144, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment Number 144 to Assembly Bill 316.
Assemblyman Watts has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 144 to Assembly Bill 316. Remarks?
Thank you. The amendment authorizes a local authority to adopt an ordinance prohibiting the unlawful possession of unregistered vehicles unfit for use and defers to the local ordinance.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 144 to Assembly Bill 316 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 318, introduced by Assemblyman Nguyen et al., Senators Doniati and Pizzina, and Ackley to Medicine, revising certain procedures relating to the expiration of a license to practice medicine, requiring a physician assistant practitioner of respiratory care or perfusionist or the insurer of such a person to report certain information relating to an action or claim of malpractice to the Board of Medical Examiners, providing administrative penalties, requiring the Board to investigate a physician assistant practitioner of respiratory care or perfusionist in certain circumstances, authorizing the Board to examine such a person under certain circumstances and providing other measures properly in thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 7, end of Section 7, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 181, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 181 to Assembly Bill 318.
Assemblywoman Marzola has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 181 to Assembly Bill 318. Remarks?
Amendment 181 to Assembly Bill 318 does the following: increases the amount of a fine from $5,000 to $10,000. The Board of Medical Examiners may impose against a licensee for each violation. It also requires the funds from penalties received by the board be deposited with the state treasurer.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 181 to Assembly Bill 318 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 321, introduced by Assemblyman Carter Anderson and Lower Hatch, and Ackley to Public Safety, setting forth certain requirements and restrictions concerning foil balloons that are sold, offered for sale, or manufactured in the state, prohibiting with certain exceptions a person from selling, offering for sale, or manufacturing a foil balloon that fails to meet certain requirements, requiring the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada to adopt a standard for the testing and evaluation of the dielectric performance of foil balloons, prohibiting a person from committing certain acts against the infrastructure of a public utility, providing penalties, and providing them as properly in thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1 and Section 1, Section 12, end of Section 12, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 114, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 114 to Assembly Bill 321.
Assemblywoman Marzola has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 114 to Assembly Bill 321. Remarks?
Amendment 114 to Assembly Bill 321 does the following: revises the dates of the prescribed phase-in period by which certain percentages of the foil balloons sold, offered for sale, or manufactured by a person must be compliant, and it also establishes enhanced penalties.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 114 to Assembly Bill 321 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 334, introduced by Assemblywoman Brown May, and relating to insurance requiring under certain circumstances and ensure that requires the inspection or further inspection of a motor vehicle relating to a claim to conduct the inspection or further inspection within a certain period of time, providing an administrative penalty and providing other measures properly in thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 198, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 198 to Assembly Bill 334.
Assemblywoman Marzola has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 198 to Assembly Bill 334. Remarks?
Amendment 198 to Assembly Bill 334 does the following: increases the time period an insurer must conduct an inspection for repair, requires that at the time of inspection or further inspection of a motor vehicle, an insurer must provide a copy of estimate, and it also provides that a person who violates the provision of the bill is subject to administrative fines.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 198 to Assembly Bill 334 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 338, introduced by Assemblywoman Peters, an act relating to Medicaid, requiring the state plan for Medicaid to provide coverage of art therapy services to the extent authorized by federal law, requiring the Department of Health and Human Services to apply for a waiver or an amendment to the state plan to receive federal funding for coverage of art therapy services, requiring any person who wishes to provide art therapy services to a recipient of Medicaid to enroll with the Division of Healthcare Financing and Policy of the Department, requiring an enrolled art therapist to report the abuse of certain persons and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 5, end of Section 5, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 189 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 189 to Assembly Bill 338.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 189 to Assembly Bill 338. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 189 to Assembly Bill 338 revises definitions and authorizes certain funds in the Nevada Cultural Account to be used for supporting programs and projects that improve health outcomes through the arts and humanities.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 189 to Assembly Bill 338 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 342, introduced by Assemblyman Hibbets et al., an act relating to cannabis, requiring an adult-use cannabis retail store and cannabis consumption lounge to take certain actions to verify the age of a consumer before selling cannabis or a cannabis product to the consumer, requiring the Cannabis Compliance Board to adopt regulations setting forth standards for an independent third-party age verification service to be used by an adult-use cannabis retail store and cannabis consumption lounge, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 395 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 395 to Assembly Bill 342.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 395 to Assembly Bill 342. Remarks?
Amendment 395 deletes Section 1 of the bill and requires a cannabis establishment agent prior to selling cannabis or cannabis products to verify the age of a consumer.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 395 to Assembly Bill 342 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 355, introduced by Assemblyman Howdigi et al., an act relating to firearms, prohibiting a person who is less than 21 years of age from possessing certain firearms, making it unlawful to aid or knowingly permit a person who is less than 21 years of age to possess a firearm under certain circumstances, revising provisions relating to the storage of a firearm, revising provisions relating to the handling, possession, or control of a firearm by certain children, providing penalties, and providing other measures properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 321 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 321 to Assembly Bill 355.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 321 to Assembly Bill 355. Remarks?
Amendment 321 provides that the provisions do not apply to a member of the armed forces who is under 21 years of age, an honorably discharged member of the armed forces, or a law enforcement officer who is employed by federal, state, or local law enforcement agency.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 321 to Assembly Bill 355 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 356, introduced by Assemblyman Dickman et al., Senators Severs, Gansert et al., an act relating to mobile tracking devices, prohibiting a person from installing, concealing, or otherwise placing a mobile tracking device in or on the motor vehicle of another person under certain circumstances, providing penalties, and providing other measures properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1. Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 322, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 322 to Assembly Bill 356.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 322 to Assembly Bill 356. Remarks?
Amendment 322 deletes two subsections and adds cosigners.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 322 to Assembly Bill 356 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 358, introduced by Assemblyman Gray et al., Senator Stone, an act relating to health care, creating the Bureau of Emergency Medical Services in the State Fire Marshal Division of the Department of Public Safety, transferring to the Bureau certain duties related to emergency medical services, revising the membership of the Committee on Emergency Medical Services, requiring the State Fire Marshal to appoint a chief of the Bureau, making various other changes relating to emergency medical services, and providing other matters properly in thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 45, end of Section 45, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 487, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 487 to Assembly Bill 358.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of amendment number 487 to Assembly Bill 358. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 487 to Assembly Bill 358 requires the State Board of Health to approve any regulations adopted by the Bureau of Emergency Medical Services or the Chief of the Bureau.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 487 to Assembly Bill 358 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 373, introduced by Assemblyman Gorlow et al., an act relating to deceptive trade practices, increasing civil and criminal penalties for engaging in a deceptive trade practice directed toward an elderly person, revising the statute of limitations for engaging in a deceptive trade practice, and providing other measures properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 5, end of Section 5, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 263, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Judiciary.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Assembly Bill 263 to the adoption of Amendment 263 to Assembly Bill 373.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of amendment number 263 to Assembly Bill 373. Remarks?
Amendment 263 adds a new section to the bill clarifying the authority of the Attorney General with respect to deceptive trade practices. It increases the amount of the civil penalty that the Attorney General may seek for each violation and revises penalties.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 263 to Assembly Bill 373 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
Bills ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 376, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs, an act relating to state employment, establishing provisions governing paid family leave for certain state employees under certain circumstances, and providing other measures properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 334, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, most eligible speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 334 to AB 376.
Assemblywoman Torres has moved for the adoption of amendment number 334 to Assembly Bill 376. Remarks?
The amendment expands eligibility for the 8 weeks of paid family leave to the non-classified and unclassified employees of the executive branch.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 334 to Assembly Bill 376 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 387, introduced by the Committee on Natural Resources, an act relating to water, revising provisions relating to groundwater basins, requiring the state engineer to consider the best available science when rendering decisions, revising provisions relating to the appropriation of underground water, and providing other measures properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 13, end of Section 13, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 286, proposed by the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources.
Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 286 to Assembly Bill 387.
Assemblywoman Cohen has moved for the adoption of amendment number 286 to Assembly Bill 387. Remarks?
The amendment provides a definition for best available science and requires the state engineer to consider hydrologic connections and certain determinations relating to the appropriation of water.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 286 to Assembly Bill 387 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 392, introduced by Assemblyman Kasama et al., an act related to property prohibiting certain deceptive service agreements between an owner of residential property and a service provider, revising provisions governing persons who hold a permit to engage in property management, providing penalties, and providing other managed property in thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 7, end of Section 7, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 289 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 289 to Assembly Bill 392.
Assemblywoman Marzola has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 289 to Assembly Bill 392. Remarks?
Amendment 289 to Assembly Bill 392 does the following: deletes a county clerk and replaces it with county recorder.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 289 to Assembly Bill 392 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 398, introduced by the Committee on Commerce and Labor, an act relating to insurance prohibiting an insurer from issuing or renewing a policy of liability insurance that contains certain provisions providing penalty and providing other managed properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 288 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 288 to Assembly Bill 398.
Assemblywoman Marzola has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 288 to Assembly Bill 398. Remarks?
Amendment 288 to Assembly Bill 398 does the following: deletes the provision prohibiting an insurer from issuing or renewing a liability insurance policy that contains provision authorizing the cost of defense, legal costs and fees, and other expenses for claims to be applied to the deductible.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 288 to Assembly Bill 398 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 399, introduced by Assemblyman Yeager, an act relating to education, creating and establishing the membership powers, duties of the Subcommittee on Education and Accountability and the interim Finance Committee, and providing other managed properly in thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 380 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Legislative Operations and Elections.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 380 to Assembly Bill 399.
Assemblywoman Gorlow has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 380 to Assembly Bill 399. Remarks?
Amendment 380 to Assembly Bill 399 does the following: adds any member of the State Board of Education to a local school district board of trustees to the list of those whose attendance can be compelled at a meeting of the subcommittee, and amends the effective date.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 380 to Assembly Bill 399 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and gross in the general file.
Assembly Bill 403, introduced by the Committee on Health and Human Services, an act relating to medical facilities, removing a halfway house for persons recovering from alcohol or other substance use disorders from the definition of a facility for the dependent, revising terminology used to refer to such facilities, removing the requirement that such a facility be licensed and regulated as a facility for the dependent, and providing other measures appropriately thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 10, end of Section 10, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 274 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Health and Human Services.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 274 to Assembly Bill 403.
Assemblywoman Peters has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 274 to Assembly Bill 403. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment 274 to Assembly Bill 403 makes certain clarifying changes and revises the effective date of the bill.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 274 to Assembly Bill 403 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 407, introduced by Assemblyman Carter, an act relating to the Department of Motor Vehicles prohibiting the Director of the Department of Motor Vehicles from releasing any personal information from the files or records of the Department for any commercial use or otherwise for commercial use in the bulk distribution of surveys, marketing materials, or solicitations, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 212 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment Number 212 to Assembly Bill 407.
Assemblyman Watts has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 212 to Assembly Bill 407. Remarks?
Thank you. The amendment deletes the existing provisions of the bill and provides that the Director of the Department of Motor Vehicles shall not, with certain exceptions, release any personal information relating to the enforcement of immigration laws.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 212 to Assembly Bill 407 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 409, introduced by Assemblywoman Thomas, an act relating to cultural affairs, creating and setting forth the duties of the Juneteenth Educational and Economic Commission, creating the Juneteenth Educational and Economic Fund, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 11, end of Section 11, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 449 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Revenue.
Assemblywoman Backus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment Number 449 to Assembly Bill 409.
Assemblywoman Backus has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 449 to Assembly Bill 409. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment Number 449 to Assembly Bill 409 adds Assemblywoman Mosca to the bill as a primary sponsor, adds one additional member who is a representative of the Governor's Office to the Juneteenth Education Economic Commission, and changes a word "and" to "or" in the digest on page 1.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 449 to Assembly Bill 409 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 423, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and acting boards of trustees of school districts, restricting the time of day during which the Board of Trustees of a school district may take action or corrective action at a regular or special meeting, authorizing under certain circumstances the Board of Trustees to restrict certain public comment at a regular or special meeting, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 336 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Government Affairs.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, most educated speaker. I move to adopt Amendment 336 to AB 423.
Assemblywoman Torres has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 336 to Assembly Bill 423. Remarks?
The amendment revises when certain delayed agenda items for a school board meeting may be acted on.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 336 to Assembly Bill 423 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 425, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, an act relating to net metering, authorizing the users of a low-income house shared net metering system to participate in net metering, exempting the owner-operator of a low-income housing shared net metering system from certain provisions of law, requiring the Public Utilities Commission of Nevada to adopt certain regulations revising provisions governing the administration of net metering, and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 16, end of Section 16, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 211 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure.
Assemblyman Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment Number 211 to Assembly Bill 425.
Assemblyman Watts has moved for the adoption of Amendment Number 211 to Assembly Bill 425. Remarks?
The amendment revises provisions concerning low-income housing shared net metering systems.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment Number 211 to Assembly Bill 425 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted and engrossed in the general file.
Assembly Bill 455, introduced by the Committee on Revenue. An act relating to tobacco, authorizing the Department of Taxation to impose a civil penalty for certain violations relating to contraband tobacco products and providing other matters properly relating thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 329 proposed by the Assembly Committee on Revenue.
Assemblywoman Backus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of amendment number 329 to Assembly Bill 455.
Assemblywoman Backus has moved for the adoption of amendment number 329 to Assembly Bill 455. Remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Amendment number 329 to Assembly Bill 455 changes the civil penalty to $10,000 or the total cost incurred by the department relating to transportation, storage, and disposal of contraband tobacco, whichever is greater.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting amendment number 329 to Assembly Bill 455 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted, engrossed into general file. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order of Business 8.
Order of Business 8.
Thank you. I move that upon return from reprint, the following Assembly Bills: Assembly Bill 77, Assembly Bill 125, Assembly Bill 135, Assembly Bill 184, 197, 222, 252, 257, 259, 261, 279, 293, 321, 338, 376, 399, 403, 409, and 425 be re-referred to your Committee on Ways and Means.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. Assemblywoman Howdigi.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. I move that we stand in a 1-minute recess to allow members to take a quick restroom break and come back. Thanks.
That sounds like a great plan. We're in recess.
Biology break? Oh, perfect.
The Assembly will come back to order. We'll go next to Order Business 12, General File and Third Reading.
Assembly Bill 8, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and activating the Metropolitan Police Departments, revising the membership of a Metropolitan Police Committee on Fiscal Affairs to add one additional member from the participating political subdivision, that is, a county, and one additional member selected by the committee from the general public, and providing other matters properly in their chair, the people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 8 revises the membership of the Metropolitan Police Committee on Fiscal Affairs. The number of members from a participating county is increased from 2 to 3, and the number of members from the general public is increased from 1 to 2.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 26 ayes, 16 nays. The bill, having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 32, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary and Activating Criminal Justice, providing that information collected or stored by the Department of Sentencing Policy for the purpose of analyzing and understanding the criminal justice system is confidential, revising the qualifications of the Executive Director of the Department, revising provision concerning the membership of the Nevada Sentencing Commission, requiring that certain data tracked and assessed by the Commission include the housing status of persons admitted to and released from prison, authorizing the Nevada Local Justice Reinvestment Coordinating Council to accept any gift, donation, bequest, grant, or other source of money for the purpose of carrying out its duties, revising provisions relating to risk and needs assessments administered to certain probationers and parolees, authorizing the Division of Parole and Probation of the Department of Public Safety to impose confinement in a jail or detention facility or place a person under a system of active electronic monitoring for technical violations of the conditions of probation or parole, requiring the system of graduated sanctions adopted by the Division to include guidance on the use of such confinement and electronic monitoring, revising the definition of technical violation as the term relates to violations of the conditions of probation or parole, revising provisions relating to the temporary and full revocation of probation, suspension of sentence, or parole supervision for technical violations of the conditions of probation or parole, requiring the Department of Sentencing Policy to collect and analyze certain data and submit a report to the Director of the Legislative Council Bureau, and providing other matters properly thereto, the people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 10, end of Section 10, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 or the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 32 revises certain provisions governing the Department of Sentencing Policy, including changing the requirements to serve as an executive director. This bill also revises provisions relating to the Division of Parole and Probation of the Department of Public Safety, including revising the risk and needs assessment administered to certain probationers and parolees. Lastly, this bill authorizes a court or the State Board of Parole Commissioners to revoke probation, suspension of sentence, or parole supervision at the request of a probationer or parolee.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There were 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill, having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed or transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 60, introduced by the Committee on Government Affairs and Activating Local Improvements, revising the process for the governing body of a municipality to provide notice of the annual assessment roll for a neighborhood improvement project, and providing other matters properly thereto, the people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblyman Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 60 requires the governing body of a municipality that acquires or improve a neighborhood improvement project to annually prepare an amendment to the assessment roll and an estimate of the expenditures for the next fiscal year, to provide notice and hold a public hearing regarding the amendment, and to confirm and mail notice of the amendment.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed or transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 177, introduced by Assemblyman Gurr et al., enacting the county assessors revising provisions relating to the sharing of parcel data sets by the state demographer to include an association for operators and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblyman Gurr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the clerk read most of what that bill means, but what it does mean truly is that it allows current information to go to the 811 operator, so when you dig up in your yard, or outside your yard, you don't blow yourself up. So that's essentially what that says in layman's terms.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There were 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare passed or transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 185, introduced by Assemblywoman Mosca, enacted relating to education requiring school districts, charter schools, and university schools for profoundly gifted pupils to take certain measures to accommodate a pupil who plans to transfer to the school district or school or leave the school district or school because of the documented pending military transfer of a parent or guardian and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 3, end of Section 3, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Mosca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 185 requires a school district, charter school, or university school for profoundly gifted pupils to make reasonable efforts to accommodate a pupil who transfers schools due to the documented military transfer of a parent or legal guardian. Order of Business 15.
Order Business 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a proud active duty enlisted military spouse, I'm very excited for this bill to support what almost every other state does to support military families through advanced enrollment.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed or transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 207, introduced by Assemblyman Gonzalez and Wynn, enacted relating to education, authorizing the Board of Trustees of a school district and the governing body of a charter school to obtain insurance for liability arising out of the participation of a pupil in a work-based learning program and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblyman Koenig.
Thank you, Speaker. Assembly Bill 207 authorizes the Board of Trustees of a school district or the governing body of a charter school to purchase and maintain insurance against any liability arising out of a student's participation in a work-based learning program. The bill also prohibits a school district or charter school from charging a student or the parent or legal guardian of a student for the cost of such insurance coverage. This bill is effective July 1st, 2023.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 214, introduced by Assemblywoman Anderson, Senator Daley, enacted relating to regional transportation commissions, requiring the Regional Transportation Commission in certain counties to establish an advisory committee, revising certain requirements relating to the security and operations of a regional transportation commission, revising certain requirements relating to the establishment of an advisory committee by a regional transportation commission in certain counties, and providing other matters properly thereto. The people's state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 8, end of Section 8, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 214 requires a Regional Transportation Commission, or RTC, in a county whose population is 100,000 or more, but less than 700,000, which is currently Washoe County, to establish an advisory committee to provide certain information and advice to the RTC related to public mass transportation in the county.
This bill also makes various changes to the membership of such an advisory committee that already exists in a county whose population is 700,000 or more, currently Clark County. Among other changes, the RTC in such a county must appoint all members. The bill further requires an RTC or any person who contracts with an RTC to operate a public transit system to maintain any audio or video recording that is used as evidence in certain disciplinary actions or contains an incident on a public transit system that results in an injury to an employee. Finally, AB 214 allows an RTC to establish fines for passengers who refuse to comply with a regional or statewide health and safety standard or mandate.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the chief clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? The chief clerk will record the vote. There are 28 ayes, 14 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 231, introduced by Assemblywoman Backus, an act relating to the Uniform Commercial Code, enacting the 2022 amendments to the Uniform Commercial Code, enacting the 2018 amendments to Article 9 of the Code, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1. Section 112, end of Section 112, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Backus.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 231 enacts certain amendments to the Uniform Commercial Code, which is a set of uniform laws governing commercial transactions. Among other things, this bill revises provisions related to various emerging technologies, including transactions involving controllable electronic records, certain electronic payment rights, chattel paper, and controllable electronic accounts.
Are there any further remarks? Assemblyman Urick.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Order Business 15.
Order Business 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Changes to the Uniform Commercial Code are typically perfunctory updates that help commerce in our state and country run smoothly. As originally presented, AB 231 was just that, a regular and helpful update to the Uniform Commercial Code, apart from one section that we felt deserved more thought and attention before we passed it. I would like to start by offering a word of thanks to the bill sponsor, my colleague from District 37, for her willingness to work with us to address the concerns that were identified in the original version of AB 231. As amended, I believe it serves as a great example of how the legislative process should and often does work in Nevada, wherein the various stakeholders and the parties can come together to work through issues and advance the right policies at the right time. Today, in its amended form, AB 231 excludes from the definition of money any medium of exchange in an electronic form. As a result, central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, of any type and issued by any government would not be covered by the rules applicable to money. Because cryptographic currencies like Bitcoin would be controllable electronic records, or CERs, all of the CER rules would apply to them, including perfection of security interests by filing or control, and protection of qualified purchasers of CERs against competing property interests. Again, we are grateful for the opportunity to work with the bill sponsor to identify a workable solution to AB 231 and are pleased to offer our full support today as amended. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Are there further remarks? Seeing none, the chief clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief clerk will record the vote. There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and order transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 267, introduced by Assemblyman Torres et al., Senators Doñate et al., an act relating to healthcare, revising provisions relating to the requirement that certain medical facilities conduct training of agents and employees in cultural competency, requiring the Office of Minority Health and Equity of the Department of Health and Human Services to establish, maintain, and distribute a list of courses and programs relating to cultural competency that certain medical facilities are required to use to conduct training of certain agents and employees, increasing the number of hours of instruction relating to cultural competency that certain healthcare professionals are required to complete, and providing other matters properly named thereto. The people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly to enact as follows. Section 1, end of Section 1. Section 10, end of Section 10, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. AB 267 requires the State Board of Health to adopt regulations to require a medical facility for the dependent, and certain other facilities to conduct training relating specifically to cultural competency for certain persons providing care to patients or residents of a facility. Further, the measure requires certain healthcare professionals to complete a certain number of hours of instruction relating to cultural competency and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 32 ayes, 10 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and ordered transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 272, introduced by Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno, an act relating to mail theft, establishing provisions relating to mail theft, providing penalties, and providing other measures relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Assembly Bill 272 establishes the crime of mail theft. A person who commits mail theft is guilty of a Category D felony with a prison term of 1 to 4 years and a fine of up to $5,000 and must pay restitution.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and ordered transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 303, introduced by the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure, an act relating to motor vehicles, revising provisions relating to the towing of a motor vehicle when a tow is requested by certain persons and providing other measures relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 2, end of Section 2, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblyman Miller.
Assembly Bill 303 removes the time restriction when a towing operator can charge a fee or cost for the towing and storage of a vehicle. The bill also prohibits towing operators from charging a fee or cost for towing vehicles solely due to an expired registration and provides that doing so is a violation subject to certain penalties. Lastly, the bill revises the situations in which an owner may pay a hardship tariff, but limits the owner of a towed motor vehicle from paying the hardship tariff more than once per year.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 28 ayes, 14 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and ordered transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 343, introduced by Assemblyman C.H. Miller, an act relating to occupational therapy, authorizing the Board of Occupational Therapy to issue a license by reciprocity as an occupational therapist or occupational therapy assistant, authorizing the board to issue certain citations to licensees for certain violations, revising the qualifications for a person to obtain a license as an occupational therapist or occupational therapy assistant, providing a salary for members of the board, revising various provisions relating to licensing occupational therapists and occupational therapy assistants, and providing other measures relating thereto. The people's state of Nevada, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 20, end of Section 20, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
There are none.
Remarks. Assemblyman Miller.
Assembly Bill 343 revises requirements to obtain or renew a license or a temporary license as an occupational therapist or occupational therapy assistant, and authorizes the Board of Occupational Therapy to issue a license by reciprocity as an occupational therapist or occupational therapy assistant. It also provides for the issuance of a provisional license, revises the applicability of an exemption for students, authorizes the board to issue a citation and impose an administrative fine, and lastly provides that each member of the board is entitled to a salary while engaged in the business of the board. Thank you.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, the Chief Clerk will open the roll. Would anyone like to change their vote? Chief Clerk will record the vote. There are 42 ayes, 0 nays. The bill having received a constitutional majority, declare it passed and ordered transmitted to the Senate.
Assembly Bill 50, introduced by the Committee on Judiciary, enacting the crimes arising provisions relating to the prosecution of certain crimes and providing other measures appropriately thereto, the people of the state of Nevada represented in Senate and Assembly, to enact as follows: Section 1, end of Section 1, Section 4, end of Section 4, end of bill.
Are there any amendments to Section 1 of the bill as a whole?
I have Amendment 485, proposed by Assemblywoman Brittany Miller.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move for the adoption of Amendment 485 to Assembly Bill 50.
Assemblywoman Miller has moved for the adoption of Amendment number 485 to Assembly Bill 50. Remarks?
Amendment 485 makes an appropriation from the State General Fund to the Office of the Attorney General to be used for personnel, operating, travel, and information technology expenses relating to the prosecution of retail crime.
Are there any further remarks? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting Amendment number 485 to Assembly Bill 50 signify by saying aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. The amendment is adopted. Are there further amendments to the bill?
There are none.
The bill is ordered reprinted, engrossed into general file. That takes us to Order Business 15, remarks from the floor. Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is a special day for our colleague from Assembly District 35, the beloved wife of Andy, mom to Haley and Aaron. Today we celebrate the day of her birth. My colleague has worked for various nonprofits throughout her career. She cares deeply about healthcare access for all Nevadans. In honor of this auspicious occasion, we welcome members to join us in the caucus room to enjoy an assortment of brownies, to include regular, French, cream cheese, caramel ganache. So please, make her feel special on this day. Happy birthday.
Any other order of business 15? Remarks from the floor. Assemblywoman Howdiggy?
A 1 minute recess, Mr. Speaker.
1 minute recess. The Assembly will come back to order. We will go to Order Business 8. Assemblywoman Monroe Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Assembly Bill 50, which is currently on general file, be referred to your Committee on Ways and Means.
Assemblywoman, I think it has been ordered to reprint, so could you amend that motion, please?
Upon reprint, that it be re-referred to your Committee on Ways and Means.
You've heard the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Motion carries. Now back to Order of Business 15, remarks from the floor. Assemblywoman Howdiggy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We acknowledged a few of the organizations who were here with us today, but in addition, we also have Cannabis Education and Appreciation Day at the Legislature. Tomorrow, we are celebrating Agricultural Day at the Legislature, and the Nevada Cattlemen's Association will be hosting a breakfast. Seeing no other business, Mr. Speaker, I move that we stand adjourned until Friday, April 21st at the hour of 11:30 a.m.
Assemblywoman Howdiggy has moved that the Assembly stand adjourned until Friday, April 21st, 2023 at the hour of 11:30 a.m. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.